Long before alarm clocks, traffic laws, or written constitutions, medieval people lived by rules that shaped every hour of their lives. Some were born out of fear, some from religion, some from pure habit, and some from moments of chaos that terrified an entire town into obedience. What's strange is not that these rules existed back then. What's strange is that many of them never truly disappeared. They softened, changed names, lost their original meaning, but they survived. Even now, centuries after castles crumbled and kings lost their crowns, we still follow medieval rules often without knowing why. Imagine a narrow medieval street at dawn. The stones are damp, the air smells of smoke and animals, and the day begins not when you feel ready, but when the bell rings. Bells ruled medieval life. Church bells told people when to wake, when to work, when to eat, when to pray, and when to sleep. Time did not belong to individuals. It belonged to the community. Today, we think our schedules are personal, but the idea that a sound tells everyone at once when the day officially begins is medieval at its core. School bells, factory whistles, office start times, even the concept of business hours descend directly from those ringing towers. In the Middle Ages, ignoring the bell wasn't freedom, it was suspicious. Someone who didn't appear at the right time was seen as lazy, rebellious, or dangerous. That quiet pressure to be on time still hangs over us, even when no one can quite explain why being 5 minutes late feels like a moral failure. Medieval rules were often about order, because order meant survival. Streets were narrow, houses were wooden, and fire was a constant terror. That's why medieval towns created strict rules about where fires could be lit, how candles were used, and when cooking had to stop. Curfews weren't about crime at first. They were about extinguishing flames. The word curfew itself comes from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire. At night, a bell would ring, and everyone had to put out or cover their hearth. Today, curfews still exist, especially for children during emergencies or in times of unrest. Most people assume curfews are about control or safety from crime, but their roots lie in medieval fear of fire spreading through tightly packed homes. We still obey a rule born from flickering flames and wooden roofs. Even the way we greet authority has medieval fingerprints all over it. Bowing, standing when someone important enters the room, removing hats indoors. These habits began as visible signs of submission and respect in feudal society. A medieval peasant removed his cap not out of politeness, but to show he posed no threat and accepted his lower status. Knights removed helmets to show loyalty. Clergy expected heads to be uncovered in sacred spaces as a sign of humility before God. Today, most people don't think of hierarchy when they take off a hat in a courtroom or stand when a judge enters, but the rule persists. The act still signals respect, even though the original social structure that demanded it no longer exists. Medieval table manners are another ghost at our modern dinner tables. In a medieval hall where dozens of people ate together from shared dishes, rules were essential to prevent chaos and disease. Don't reach across someone else's plate. Don't lick your fingers and then touch shared food. Don't blow your nose at the table. Don't put bones back into the common bowl. These rules were enforced not because they were polite, but because breaking them was disgusting and dangerous. Over time, these survival rules transformed into etiquette. Today, children are scolded for elbows on the table or chewing loudly, even though few adults remember that these rules were once about preventing sickness in crowded halls. We follow them because they feel right, not because we remember their purpose. The medieval obsession with cleanliness, strange as it sounds, also lingers. While medieval hygiene was inconsistent, certain rules were strictly enforced. Water sources were protected by law. Washing clothes and drinking water was forbidden. Waste disposal followed set routines. People were fined for dumping filth in the wrong place. The idea that there are correct ways to handle waste and incorrect ones didn't vanish with the Middle Ages. Modern sanitation laws, trash collection schedules, and even social shame around littering echo medieval attempts to keep disease at bay. When someone glares at you for throwing garbage where it doesn't belong, they're unknowingly channeling a medieval town official. Then there's the rule of silence at night. Medieval towns slept lightly. With no artificial lighting, night was dangerous. People were expected to stay indoors, speak quietly, and avoid unnecessary movement. Night watchmen enforced silence not just to keep order, but to listen for trouble footsteps, shouts, fires, or thieves. Today, noise complaints, quiet hours, And laws against loud disturbances after dark are direct descendants of these medieval practices. Even in brightly lit modern cities, we still believe night should be quieter, calmer, more restrained. It feels natural, but it's inherited. Medieval clothing rules were rigid and deeply symbolic. Sumptuary laws dictated who could wear what. Certain colors, fabrics, and decorations were reserved for specific classes. Purple, for instance, was restricted because dyeing it was expensive and associated with royalty. These rules maintained social order by making status visible at a glance. While modern societies claim to value equality, echoes remain. Dress codes at schools, workplaces, and formal events still enforce unspoken hierarchies. You may not be legally forbidden from wearing silk or gold, but social consequences still exist for dressing above or below what's expected. The medieval instinct to judge people by appearance never truly left us. Marriage rules offer another example. In medieval times, marriage was less about love and more about property, alliances, and legitimacy. Rules governed who could marry whom, how public the ceremony had to be, and who could witness it. One key rule was that marriage required witnesses to be valid, preventing secret unions that could disrupt inheritance. Today, we still require witnesses, documentation, and public records for marriage. The emotional meaning has changed, but the structure remains. We still believe that a relationship only becomes real once it is recognized by authority and recorded, an idea deeply rooted in medieval legal thinking. The medieval church shaped countless rules that still shadow modern life. The 7-day week, for instance, comes from religious tradition reinforced during the Middle Ages. Workdays and rest days were clearly defined, with Sundays set aside as sacred. Even in secular societies, the idea of a weekend persists. Many people no longer attend church, yet they still feel that certain days are meant for rest, family, or reflection. That rhythm of time was hammered into society centuries ago and never fully left. Oaths and promises were sacred in medieval culture. Swearing an oath wasn't just symbolic. It was believed to bind your soul. Breaking an oath could damn you spiritually and ruin you socially. This belief made verbal agreements powerful. While modern contracts are written and legalistic, we still place emotional weight on promises. Phrases like, "my word is my bond," echo medieval thinking. Even today, calling someone untrustworthy carries moral weight beyond legal consequences. We still judge character through a medieval lens. Medieval justice relied heavily on public displays. Punishments were meant to be seen. Stocks, pillories, and public shaming reinforced rules by humiliating those who broke them. While we no longer lock people in wooden frames in town squares, public shaming has evolved rather than vanished. Social media outrage, public apologies, and reputational destruction follow the same logic. Break the rule, and the community will see and judge. The tools have changed, but the instinct is medieval. The rule of waiting your turn has surprisingly deep roots. Medieval markets were chaotic places, so towns imposed rules about queuing, pricing, and fair access. Cutting ahead wasn't just rude, it could lead to violence. Order meant safety. Today, queues are sacred in many cultures. People become genuinely angry when someone skips a line, even when the stakes are low. That emotional reaction comes from centuries of conditioning that equated order with survival. Hospitality rules also linger. In medieval society, offering food and shelter to travelers was both a moral duty and a survival strategy. Today's guest etiquette offering refreshments, making visitors comfortable, thanking hosts, comes from a time when refusing hospitality could mean death for a traveler and dishonor for a household. Even now, people feel obligated to offer tea or water to guests, often without questioning why. Even knocking before entering has medieval roots. Houses were crowded and privacy was rare, but respect for thresholds mattered. Entering without permission could imply threat or insult. Knocking announced peaceful intentions. Today, despite locks, doorbells, and phones, we still knock. Walking into a room unannounced feels wrong, even when no danger exists. The rule survives because it's embedded in social instinct. The medieval fear of gossip also created rules we still follow. Speaking ill of neighbors could lead to feuds, violence, or legal trouble. Communities discouraged gossip to maintain fragile peace. Modern workplaces and schools still warn against rumors, framing them as toxic or harmful. The reasoning has changed, but the rule remains. Even the idea of appropriate behavior in public spaces is medieval. Medieval towns enforced rules about how people walked, spoke, and behaved in communal areas. Public order mattered more than personal expression. Today, we still expect people to behave differently in public than in private. Loudness, gestures, clothing all are subtly regulated by social rules that trace back to medieval streets. What's most fascinating is that many of these rules no longer serve their original purpose. We don't fear wooden cities burning to ash every night, yet curfews remain. We don't share trenchers and communal bowls, yet table manners persist. We don't live under feudal lords, yet we still instinctively show deference to authority. These rules became habits, and habits became culture. Medieval people followed rules because the cost of breaking them was immediate and brutal. Modern people follow them because breaking them feels wrong, awkward, or embarrassing. The punishment moved from the body to the mind. Shame replaced the lash. Discomfort replaced fines. But the structure stayed. Every time you wait in line, check the time. Lower your voice at night. Dress a certain way for an event. Stand for authority, knock on a door, or apologize for being late. You are quietly obeying medieval rules. Not because you have to, but because centuries of repetition taught society that this is how things are done. The Middle Ages are often imagined as distant, dark, and irrelevant, but they live on in invisible ways. Their rules became the skeleton of modern life. We walk through cities built on their laws, speak through manners shaped by their fears, and organize our days according to rhythms they established. And perhaps the strangest part is this: if you stopped following these rules tomorrow, people wouldn't call you medieval. They'd call you rude, irresponsible, or strange. The rules outlived their world so completely that we forgot where they came from. The bells may be silent, the castles in ruins, and the kings long dead, but medieval rules still whisper in everything we do. Those whispers grow louder the more closely you listen to everyday life. Take something as ordinary as forming a habit of waking early. In medieval society, waking late was more than laziness, it was a moral failing. Daylight was precious, and idleness was considered sinful. Church sermons warned that sleeping past sunrise invited temptation and vice. Labor began early because daylight governed productivity, but religion gave that necessity moral weight. Today, even when artificial light and flexible work exist, waking up late still carries shame. People brag about being early risers, productivity gurus praise dawn routines, and sleeping in feels indulgent or guilty. The rule no longer protects survival, but the judgment remains. The medieval rule against loitering is another shadow we still walk through. In medieval towns, anyone standing around with no clear purpose was suspicious. Loiterers could be thieves, spies, or troublemakers. Town guards questioned people who lingered near gates, markets, or wealthy homes. This suspicion survives almost unchanged. Modern laws against loitering, and the discomfort people feel when someone stands too long without explanation, come directly from medieval fear. Even when no crime occurs, purposeless presence feels wrong. Society still demands visible justification for existence in public spaces. Then there's the idea of earning rest. In medieval life, rest was permitted only after labor. Holy days existed, but even they were framed as earned through obedience and prayer. Rest without work was condemned. This belief embedded itself so deeply that modern leisure still feels conditional. People justify rest by saying they worked hard or deserve it. Guilt accompanies relaxation. The medieval rule wasn't simply work, it was moral labor, and its echo still defines how we value our time. Consider how we still lower our voices in sacred or solemn places. Medieval churches enforced silence and reverence not just to honor God, but to maintain authority. Silence created awe. Today, even non-religious spaces like libraries, memorials, and courtrooms demand quiet. We instinctively whisper, even if no sign instructs us to. The behavior feels natural, but it was trained into society by medieval institutions that equated silence with respect and power. Even birthdays carry medieval residue. In medieval times, birthdays were rarely celebrated by common people, but when they were acknowledged, they were tied to astrology and fate. Your birth date was believed to influence your destiny, character, and fortune. While modern celebrations are cheerful, people still secretly believe birthdays are significant turning points. Milestone ages carry emotional weight far beyond logic. That belief that a number can define a person's phase of life comes from medieval thinking about time, fate, and identity. The medieval obsession with hierarchy shaped how we still interact socially. Knowing your place was essential. Speaking out of turn, interrupting a superior, or challenging authority openly could be dangerous. This created rules of conversation that persist today. People still wait to speak in meetings, hesitate to contradict bosses, and soften disagreement with polite language. Even phrases like "with all due respect" are linguistic armor, descended from medieval survival tactics. Medieval rules also shaped how we handled death. Death was public, ritualized, and governed by strict customs. Bodies were treated with reverence, processions followed set routes, and mourners behaved in prescribed ways. Today, funerals remain highly structured. Black clothing, subdued behavior, formal speeches, these customs survive even among people who don't believe in the afterlife. The medieval fear of restless spirits and divine judgment transformed into modern expectations of respect. But the rules themselves endured. The rule of not speaking ill of the dead is especially medieval. In the Middle Ages, speaking badly of the dead could invite spiritual consequences or social backlash. Today, "don't speak ill of the dead" is still considered proper, even when truth might suggest otherwise. The belief that death grants immunity from criticism isn't logical, it's inherited. Medieval markets also shaped our sense of fairness. Prices were regulated to prevent unrest. Charging too much was seen as immoral, not just unfair. This moral economy still influences how people react to price increases during emergencies. When modern companies raise prices during crises, outrage erupts. The reaction isn't purely economic, it's medieval. Deep down, society still believes some profits are wrong, even if legal. Even the concept of personal reputation is medieval at heart. In small medieval communities, reputation determined survival. A bad name could mean no help in times of need. Gossip, rumor, and public opinion held immense power. Today's obsession with online reputation, reviews, and public image follows the same logic. Social survival replaced physical survival, but the rule remains: protect your name at all costs. Medieval rules about gender behavior also echo faintly in modern expectations. Men were expected to display strength and control. Women were expected to display modesty and obedience. While societies have progressed, remnants persist in subtle judgments, how people react to assertiveness, emotion, clothing, or silence. These aren't natural instincts. Their cultural inheritance. Even punctuality itself has medieval roots beyond bells. Being late was seen as disrespectful to the community and to God's order of time. Timekeeping was sacred. Today, lateness is still taken personally. "Sorry I'm late, I sent just an apology for inconvenience. It's a moral confession." Few people can explain why time carries such emotional weight, but medieval discipline taught generations to treat time as authority. The medieval fear of crowds shaped rules we still obey instinctively. Crowds could become mobs, and mobs could topple power. Authorities imposed movement rules, procession orders, and behavior expectations. Today, crowd control, orderly exits, and even the instinct to follow lines and barriers come from those early attempts to prevent chaos. Think about how people still hesitate to sit at the wrong table, enter the wrong room, or speak in the wrong context. Medieval spaces were rigidly defined. Certain rooms were for certain people. Crossing boundaries without permission was dangerous. Modern architecture is more open, but the invisible rules remain. We sense when we don't belong somewhere, even if no one tells us. Even saying "bless you" after a sneeze has medieval origins tied to fear of illness and the soul escaping the body. We still say it automatically, even though we no longer believe sneezing invites demons. The words survived the belief. Perhaps the most powerful medieval rule we still follow is obedience to tradition itself. Medieval society valued tradition as proof of truth. "It has always been done this way" was enough justification. Today, that phrase still ends arguments. Traditions continue long after their meaning fades, protected by habit rather than reason. And that may be the true legacy of medieval rules. They trained societies not just to obey specific instructions, but to obey the idea of rules. To feel comfort in structure, to feel anxiety without it, to mistake familiarity for necessity. When modern people defend rules they don't understand, feel guilt without knowing why, or enforce social norms without benefit, they are participating in a medieval inheritance. The past didn't disappear, it settled into our instincts. We imagine ourselves as free from the shadows of castles and cloisters, but medieval life quietly shaped how freedom itself feels. Too much freedom feels wrong. Too little feels normal. That balance was forged centuries ago, through fear, faith, and survival. So the next time you feel uncomfortable breaking a rule that makes no sense, remember, it may not be your rule at all. It may be a medieval one, carried forward by countless generations who stopped asking why. The armor rusted. The banners fell. The bells went silent. But the rules stayed. And even beyond the rules we can name, there are countless small behaviors we follow without ever noticing them, like ghosts woven into daily life. Think about how people still instinctively form straight lines instead of chaotic clusters. In medieval society, straight lines symbolized discipline and control. Processions, religious marches, military formations, and even market queues were designed to show order to both God and rulers. Disorder suggested rebellion. Today, no one explains why lines must be neat, yet disorderly crowds make people anxious. The medieval fear of chaos still tightens our chests. Consider how we apologize. Medieval apologies were public and ritualized. If someone offended another, they often had to admit fault openly, sometimes kneeling or confessing before witnesses. Apologies restored social harmony more than personal feelings. Today, apologies still carry ritual weight. People expect specific words, a certain tone, visible humility. A casual or poorly worded apology feels insufficient, even if the harm is small. The structure matters more than the intent, just as it did centuries ago. Even the idea of appropriate punishment follows medieval logic. In medieval towns, punishment was expected to match the crime in a visible way. Too harsh and it risked revolt. Too soft and it encouraged lawlessness. Modern debates about punishment echo the same reasoning. People argue not just about justice but about balance, deterrence, and symbolism. The belief that punishment must be seen and felt to be effective is deeply medieval. The way we treat mistakes at work also reflects medieval discipline. In guilds, apprentices were corrected publicly to teach others. Errors weren't private learning experiences. They were lessons for the community. Today, despite modern management language, public correction still exists. Meetings, reviews, and performance discussions often carry an unspoken audience effect. Mistakes feel shameful not because they harm outcomes, but because medieval culture trained us to fear public error. Medieval rules about moderation still haunt us. Excess was sinful. Eating too much, drinking too much, laughing too loudly all were signs of moral weakness. Even now, people judge excess harshly. Someone who enjoys too much pleasure is seen as irresponsible or immature. Self-control is praised, restraint admired. This moral framing of moderation did not come from modern science. It came from medieval sermons. The medieval rule of keeping secrets also persists. Information was power, and speaking too freely could end lives. This created cultures of silence, discretion, and guarded speech. Today, people still value confidentiality instinctively. Being labeled someone who talks too much carries social consequences. Even when no danger exists, restraint feels safer. Even how we sit carries history. Standing when elders enter, offering seats to authority figures, or giving up space for perceived importance, all come from medieval social order. Chairs themselves were once symbols of power. Ordinary people stood. Only the powerful sat. The lingering respect we show to seats of authority, thrones, chairs of office, head tables comes from that symbolic past. The medieval fear of outsiders also shaped enduring rules. Strangers were dangerous. They brought disease, conflict, or deception. Towns tracked visitors, limited movement, and demanded explanation. Today's paperwork, identification checks, and suspicion of unfamiliar faces reflect the same instinct. The language has softened, but the rule remains: prove you belong. Certain topics were off limits. Modern society still has unspoken comedic boundaries. Some jokes are labeled inappropriate, not because they harm directly, but because medieval culture taught us that humor can destabilize order. The medieval rule of patience is another survivor. People were taught to endure hardship quietly, believing suffering had purpose. Complaining too much was sinful. While modern culture allows more expression, there is still admiration for those who push through silently. Endurance is praised more than rest, a value born in a world where suffering was unavoidable. Even the way we organize stories reflects medieval thinking. Moral lessons, clear heroes and villains, consequences for wrongdoing. These narrative structures were reinforced by medieval religious storytelling. Modern entertainment still follows these patterns. We expect actions to have meaning, rules to be enforced, and order to be restored. What makes these rules so powerful is that they don't feel imposed, they feel natural. They live below language, beneath conscious thought. They are taught through discomfort, approval, embarrassment, and praise. Medieval society perfected this system because it had to. Without police forces, technology, or instant communication, rules had to live inside people. And they still do. We imagine medieval people as bound by chains and swords, but the strongest chains were habits. Habits passed from parent to child, teacher to student, ruler to subject. Over centuries, those habits lost their explanations but kept their force. So when you hesitate before breaking a harmless rule, when you feel shame with no clear reason, when you enforce norms you don't benefit from, you are not being irrational. You are being historical. The Middle Ages didn't end. They dissolved slowly, quietly into us. And as long as we follow rules simply because they feel right, without asking why, a part of medieval life continues to rule the modern world. And perhaps the most revealing thing about these medieval rules is how fiercely people defend them, even when challenged. Ask someone why a rule exists, and the answer is often vague. That's just how it's done, or it's basic manners, or it's common sense. Medieval society thrived on that exact logic. Questioning rules was dangerous. Stability depended on obedience, not understanding. Over time, the habit of not questioning became the rule itself. Take the idea of proper behavior in authority spaces. Medieval courts demanded rigid posture, controlled speech, and ritualized gestures. Power was reinforced through performance. Today, whether it's a courtroom, a school office, or a corporate boardroom, people still adjust their posture, voice, and language automatically. The room itself feels heavier. No one needs to explain it. The medieval instinct to perform respect is still alive. Even the way we wait for permission traces back to medieval life. Peasants waited for lords. Apprentices waited for masters. Children waited for elders. Acting without permission could bring punishment. Today, people still hesitate before taking initiative, waiting for approval even when it's unnecessary. This hesitation isn't always fear, it's conditioning. Centuries of hierarchical living trained people to wait. Medieval rules also shaped how we understand fairness. Life was unequal, but it was expected to look fair. Rulers staged rituals of justice, mercy, and generosity. Modern leaders still do the same. Public gestures matter more than private reality. The medieval belief that fairness must be seen, not just practiced, still defines public trust. The rule of restraint in emotion is another inheritance. Medieval culture discouraged open displays of anger, grief, or joy outside specific rituals. Emotions were allowed only in controlled spaces, churches, festivals, funerals. Today, people still feel pressure to manage emotions depending on location. Crying at work feels wrong. Anger in public feels embarrassing. Celebration has appropriate places. Emotional rules remain medieval at their core. Even greetings carry history. Bowing, shaking hands, lowering the head. These gestures evolved to show peaceful intent in dangerous times. A visible empty hand meant no weapon. Today, handshakes persist even when they no longer serve that purpose. The gesture survives because trust rituals are hard to erase. The medieval rule of conformity also never truly died. Standing out was risky. Clothing, speech, and behavior marked belonging. Modern society claims to celebrate individuality, yet people still feel intense pressure to fit in. Trends replace laws, but the rule remains the same. Difference invites scrutiny. Perhaps the most haunting survival of medieval rules is how people police each other. Medieval authorities couldn't watch everyone, so communities enforced norms themselves. Neighbors corrected neighbors. Shame did the work of force. Today, social enforcement is stronger than ever. People correct, criticize, and shame each other instinctively, often without authority. The system still works because it was designed to What medieval people understood, and what we often forget, is that rules don't need reasons once they become habits. They don't need enforcement once they become identity. They don't need explanation once they feel natural. That's why medieval rules survived revolutions, technology, and enlightenment. They adapted, they changed clothes, they learned new language. But they never left. And this doesn't mean all these rules are bad. Many created stability, safety, and cooperation. They helped humans live together in crowded, fragile worlds. The danger isn't in the rules themselves. The danger is in forgetting that they were created for specific problems that may no longer exist. When rules outlive their purpose, they become invisible walls. They limit behavior not through force but through discomfort. People don't feel trapped, they feel normal. So the next time you feel uneasy breaking a harmless tradition or embarrassed questioning a norm, pause for a moment. Ask yourself whether the rule protects anyone or whether it's simply an echo. Because chances are, somewhere in the distant past a medieval bell once rang, and the sound never quite faded. The torches burned out, the streets emptied. The watchman went home. But the rules kept walking forward, quietly, patiently, until they reached us. And even now, after all that distance and time, those rules continue to guide how we judge ourselves. That is their final trick. Medieval rules were not only about controlling society. They were about shaping conscience. When no one was watching, the rules still lived inside the mind. That was the true victory of medieval order, and it is why it still works today. Think about guilt. Medieval life was saturated with guilt, religious guilt, social guilt, moral guilt. People were taught to examine their thoughts, not just their actions. Sin didn't require witnesses. Modern people still carry this internal judge. We feel guilty for resting too long, for enjoying pleasure, for speaking out of turn, for wanting more than we have. No law demands this guilt. No authority enforces it. Yet it feels real. That voice is medieval. The rule of humility is another survivor. Medieval culture praised humility as a virtue and punished pride harshly. To appear too confident was dangerous. Today, confidence is admired, but only up to a point. Too much, and it becomes arrogance. People are expected to downplay success, soften praise, and appear modest. Even achievement must bow to an old rule. Do not rise too high. Even how we handle disagreement carries medieval fingerprints. Open confrontation was risky in tightly knit communities. Disputes were expected to be indirect, softened, or handled through intermediaries. Modern communication still favors politeness over honesty. People avoid blunt disagreement, use careful language, and fear being seen as difficult. The medieval fear of social rupture still shapes how truth is spoken. The medieval rule of endurance also lives on in how people admire suffering. Struggle is romanticized. Hardship is seen as character building. People are praised for surviving misery rather than questioning why it exists. This belief made sense in a world where suffering was unavoidable. Today, it often prevents change. Yet the rule persists. Even the concept of earning respect is medieval. Respect was not automatic. It was tied to age, status, obedience, and service. Modern societies talk about equality, but respect is still conditional. People are judged by titles, roles, productivity, and conformity. The structure is old, even if the labels are new. Medieval rules also shaped silence around power. Questioning authority openly was dangerous, so criticism learned to disguise itself. Sarcasm, whispers, jokes, and coded language became tools of survival. Today, indirect criticism still thrives. People often speak around power instead of to it. The habit remains, long after the danger faded. What makes all of this remarkable is how rarely these rules are taught directly. Children are not given medieval explanations. They learn through reaction. Approval feels warm. Disapproval feels sharp. Embarrassment teaches faster than logic. This is exactly how medieval society passed its rules down quietly, efficiently, relentlessly. And so the rules continued through plagues, wars, revolutions, factories, electricity, and the internet. They survived because they adapted to human emotion rather than depending on force. We live in a world that believes it has escaped the past. We call ourselves modern, rational, enlightened. Yet we still obey bells without hearing them, curfews without fire, hierarchies without kings, and manners without shared bowls. The Middle Ages did not disappear in a dramatic moment. They dissolved into habits, into instincts, into that uneasy feeling that something is wrong even when no harm is done. And maybe that is the quiet lesson hidden inside all these rules. Civilization does not end when buildings fall or governments change. It ends only when people stop obeying ideas they no longer need. Until then, the medieval world walks beside us, not in armor, not with swords, but in manners, guilt, silence, and habit. And every time we follow a rule for no clear reason at all, we keep it alive. And yet there is one last layer to these medieval rules that is easy to miss because it hides behind the idea of normal. Once something feels normal, it stops feeling like a rule at all. That is why breaking certain rules feels physically uncomfortable. Your heart beats faster. Your body tightens. You feel exposed. Medieval punishment trained the nervous system as much as the mind. Even though the threat is gone, the reaction remains. When you speak out of turn, refuse a greeting, ignore a social ritual, or reject an expectation, your body reacts before your logic can catch up. That reaction is ancient. Medieval life also created rules about visibility. Being seen doing the right thing mattered. Piety, obedience, and virtue had to be performed. Today, performance still matters. People don't just behave well. They want to be seen behaving well. Public kindness, visible productivity, displayed morality, these are medieval survival strategies dressed in modern language. The rule was never just be good, it was be seen being good. Even the rule of keeping busy is medieval. Idleness was associated with sin, temptation, and decay. A still body was a dangerous body. Modern people still fear doing nothing. Silence feels awkward. Stillness feels wasteful. Phones fill every empty moment. Productivity fills every gap. The medieval fear of idle time survived into an age that no longer needs it. Medieval rules also shaped how people view authority as necessary, even when flawed. A bad lord was still preferable to chaos. Order mattered more than justice. That belief still lives quietly in modern tolerance of broken systems. People complain, but hesitate to dismantle. Stability feels safer than uncertainty. That instinct was learned in an era where chaos meant famine and death. Even the way people say goodbye carries medieval echoes. Ritualized farewells, polite endings, formal closures, all came from a time when leaving without acknowledgement could signal hostility or danger. Today, ending a conversation abruptly feels rude, even online. The rule persists long after the threat vanished. The medieval world also taught people to measure themselves constantly. Am I behaving correctly? Am I crossing a line? Am I doing enough? This constant self-monitoring helped maintain order in tightly packed communities. Today, it manifests as overthinking, self-judgment, and social anxiety. The rules moved inward. And perhaps the most enduring medieval rule of all is this: discomfort is preferable to disruption. It is better to feel uneasy than to challenge the structure. That belief kept medieval society intact through unimaginable hardship. It still keeps modern society running smoothly, even when smoother doesn't mean better. The irony is that many of these rules once protected people. They prevented fires, reduced violence, controlled disease, and kept fragile systems alive. They were solutions to real dangers. But time moved on and the dangers changed. The rules stayed. So we inherited a world where some rules still protect us, some quietly help us cooperate, and some simply linger, demanding obedience without purpose. And because they no longer announce themselves as rules, they are the hardest to see. The Middle Ages are not behind us. They are beneath us. They are in the pause before speaking, in the guilt after resting, in the line we stand in without thinking, in the apology we offer automatically. They are in the rules we follow not because we must, but because breaking them feels wrong, even when it isn't. And until we learn to ask why, until we separate habit from necessity, the medieval world will continue to breathe through modern life, quietly, patiently, waiting for the next bell to ring. And maybe that bell will never ring again because it no longer needs to. Medieval rules reached their highest form when they no longer required sound, force, or punishment. When people began enforcing them on themselves, the system was complete. That is why even rebellion often stays within medieval boundaries. People break rules carefully, quietly, apologetically. They push just far enough to feel free, but not far enough to feel exposed. Medieval society taught people how to bend without breaking, how to dissent without disrupting, how to survive inside structures rather than destroy them. That lesson passed down flawlessly. Even the way we seek permission to change rules is medieval. We ask politely, we justify ourselves. We explain our intentions, we soften our demands. In medieval times, open defiance meant death, so change had to sound respectful. Today, the danger is gone, but the language remains. The medieval rule of don't make others uncomfortable still quietly governs behavior. Comfort meant stability. Stability meant survival. Modern people still prioritize social comfort over truth, over justice, over clarity. Awkwardness feels like danger, even when it isn't. That emotional reaction was trained long before modern life existed. And so, medieval rules did something extraordinary. They transformed from survival strategies into social instincts. From enforced laws into emotional reflexes. From external controls into internal voices. We don't follow them because we believe in them. We follow them because they feel like us. That is why these rules are so hard to escape. Rejecting them doesn't feel like changing behavior, it feels like changing identity. It feels like becoming someone else. Medieval society understood that the strongest rules are the ones people defend as personality traits. I'm just polite. I'm just respectful. I'm just responsible. Words often hide rules that were never chosen, only inherited. And yet, awareness changes everything. Once you see the medieval outline beneath modern life, the spell weakens. The discomfort becomes optional. The guilt becomes negotiable. The rules stop being invisible. You can choose which ones still serve you. You can question the ones that don't. Not all medieval rules are enemies. Some still protect cooperation, kindness, and trust. But others exist only because no one ever told us we could stop. The Middle Ages were not defeated by progress. They were absorbed by habit, and habit is powerful, but not permanent. So the next time you feel that strange pressure to obey a rule that makes no sense, remember, it may not be wisdom. It may not be morality. It may not even be tradition. It may simply be history, speaking through you, asking to be obeyed one more time. And whether you listen or finally ask why is up to you. And perhaps the quietest truth of all is this: medieval rules survive because they solved human problems, not just medieval ones. Fear of chaos, fear of rejection, fear of being cast out. These fears did not vanish with castles and plagues. They simply found new shapes. Medieval people lived close together, depended on each other, and knew that one mistake could ripple through the whole community. Modern life feels larger, safer, more individual. But emotionally, we are still wired the same way. We still fear isolation. We still crave belonging. And medieval rules were expertly designed to manage those instincts. That is why shame still works better than punishment, why praise still feels intoxicating, why embarrassment still hurts more than logic. Medieval society understood human psychology long before psychology had a name. It built rules that pressed directly on the softest parts of the mind. Even the rule of don't draw attention to yourself is medieval. In dangerous times, visibility invited risk. Standing out could mean envy, accusation, or violence. Today, despite social media encouraging visibility, many people still fear attention deeply. They apologize for success. They minimize themselves. They hide ambition behind humor. That instinct was once protection, now it is habit. Medieval rules also shaped how we treat rules themselves. Breaking one rule feels like opening the door to breaking all of them. That fear of the slippery slope, if we allow this, what's next, comes straight from medieval anxiety. Order was fragile. Once cracked, it could collapse. Modern debates still echo this fear, even when evidence doesn't support it. And notice how often rules are defended emotionally rather than logically. People don't say, this rule helps us achieve X. They say, it just feels wrong not to. That feeling is the rule's true home. Medieval culture trained people to feel the rule before understanding it. Even kindness carries medieval fingerprints. Charity was encouraged not just to help others, but to preserve social balance and divine favor. Today, people still feel moral pressure to be kind in visible ways. Kindness is expected, judged, and sometimes weaponized. The structure is old, even when the language is new. The medieval rule of forgiveness also lingers. Forgiveness was promoted not for emotional healing, but for social stability. Endless grudges could tear communities apart. Modern pressure to move on or be the bigger person reflects the same priority: peace over resolution. The rule remains, even when healing does not. And so, without realizing it, we carry a medieval handbook inside us. Not written on parchment, but etched into reactions, instincts, and assumptions. It opens automatically. It closes quietly. Most days, we don't even know we're reading from it. The Middle Ages were not simply a time of ignorance and superstition. They were a time of intense social engineering. Every rule was tested by hunger, violence, faith, and fear. The ones that worked survived. The ones that failed vanished. What we inherited is not random. It is the residue of what once kept people alive together. That is why these rules feel sturdy, ancient, unshakable. But survival rules are not always living rules. A rule that once prevented fire can become a cage. A rule that once created order can become silence. A rule that once protected community can begin to smother individuality. And yet, because they are ancient, we hesitate to touch them. We treat them with the same reverence medieval people treated tradition itself. But history is not a command. It is a context. You are not wrong for feeling the pull of these rules. You are not weak for obeying them. You are human. The question is not whether medieval rules still guide us. They do, every day. The question is whether we will continue to follow them blindly, or finally decide which ones still deserve a place in our lives. Because once you see them, really see them, they lose their power to command without explanation. The bells are gone, the watchmen are gone, the torches are gone. All that remains is choice. And that choice belongs to us, not the Middle Ages. And choice is something medieval people rarely had in the way we understand it now. Choice was dangerous. Choice created uncertainty. Uncertainty threatened survival. That is why medieval rules were designed to narrow choices until life felt predictable. Predictability meant safety. And even though our world is vastly different, the human brain still prefers predictability over freedom. That is why routines feel comforting. Why breaking routine feels unsettling. Why people cling to schedules, rituals, and habits, even when they complain about them. Medieval life ran on ritual morning prayers, work hours, meal times, feast days, fast days. Ritual reduced anxiety in a world full of uncontrollable dangers. Today routines still calm us, even when the danger is gone. The rule stayed because the feeling it created was useful. Even the rule of apologizing for existing has medieval roots. Medieval peasants were expected to show deference constantly, to step aside, to lower their gaze, to speak softly. Taking up space was a privilege. Modern people still apologize for minor inconveniences, for asking questions, for needing help. Sorry to bother you is a medieval sentence wearing modern clothes. The medieval rule of endurance without complaint also shaped how people view suffering today. Pain was framed as meaningful, hardship was a test, endurance was virtue. This belief made unbearable lives bearable. But now it often prevents people from seeking better conditions. Suffering becomes proof of worth instead of a problem to solve. That mindset is not modern resilience, it is medieval survival logic. Even how we teach children reflects medieval thinking. Obedience first, understanding later. Sit still, be quiet. Follow rules. Medieval education focused on discipline before knowledge. The body had to learn control before the mind was trusted. Many modern systems still prioritize compliance over curiosity, even when creativity is praised in theory. The structure survived because it produces order. The medieval rule of not questioning elders also lingers. Age once equaled experience. Elders were living libraries in a world without books. Respecting them was practical. Today, information is everywhere, but the instinct remains. Challenging elders feels wrong even when they are incorrect. The rule persists because it is emotional, not rational. Even celebrations follow medieval patterns. Festivals existed to release pressure safely. Joy was permitted, but only at approved times in approved ways. Modern holidays still function like pressure valves. Work stops, rules loosen. Excess is allowed briefly, then order returns. Celebration itself is regulated, inherited from a time when constant joy would have threatened discipline. The medieval rule of waiting for the right time is another quiet survivor. Change was slow. Acting too quickly could bring punishment. Patience was survival. Today, people still delay action, waiting for permission, validation, or perfect conditions. Opportunity passes, but the habit of waiting remains. And look at how people react to silence in groups. Medieval silence meant tension, judgment, or danger. Someone was watching. Someone was deciding. Modern people rush to fill silence with small talk, laughter, noise. Silence still feels loaded even when it isn't. The medieval rule of conformity in belief also echoes. Believing differently could mean exile or death. Unity of belief meant unity of community. Today, disagreement still carries social risk. People self-censor opinions to avoid exclusion. The fear is ancient. What makes all of this extraordinary is that these rules were never meant to last this long. They were tools, not truths. Solutions, not laws of nature. But when tools are used for centuries, they start to look like reality itself. The medieval world trained humanity how to live tightly together under pressure. That training worked so well that we never stopped using it even after the pressure changed. And so we walk through modern life wearing medieval instincts like invisible armor. It protects us from chaos, but it also weighs us down. We mistake the weight for normality. Yet history shows something important. Rules change when people notice them. The moment a rule becomes visible, it becomes optional. You can still be polite without being silent, respectful without being small, disciplined without being exhausted, ordered without being constrained. Not every inherited rule must be destroyed, but not every inherited rule must be obeyed. The Middle Ages did not give us commandments, they gave us habits. And habits, once seen, can be reshaped. So as this story stretches across centuries and settles into the present moment, it leaves behind a quiet invitation. Not to rebel wildly, not to abandon structure, but to pause. To notice when a rule appears. To ask what problem it once solved. To decide whether that problem still exists. Because the greatest difference between medieval life and modern life is not technology or knowledge or power. It is the ability to choose consciously. The rules may still whisper, but they no longer have the final word. And when you begin to listen closely, you realize those whispers are everywhere, woven into moments so small they almost disappear. The pause before you speak honestly. The smile you force to smooth tension. The rule you obey simply because breaking it feels heavier than following it. Medieval life trained people to choose the path of least disturbance, and that instinct still guides us, quietly steering decisions we believe are entirely our own. Even the fear of being misunderstood is medieval. In tight communities, misunderstanding could spiral into accusation, conflict, or punishment. So people learn to explain themselves carefully, to over-clarify, to soften meaning. Today, people still fear being taken the wrong way. They overthink messages, reread texts, rehearse conversations in their heads. The danger is gone, but the vigilance remains. The medieval rule of reputation before reality also survived. What mattered was not always what you did, but what people believed you did. Image protected survival. Today, perception still shapes opportunity, trust, and belonging. Being seen as reliable, polite, hardworking, or moral often matters more than the truth. The medieval lesson was simple. Reality can be negotiated, but reputation must be guarded. Even how people end arguments is medieval. Medieval disputes often ended not with resolution, but with exhaustion, compromise, or authority stepping in. Peace mattered more than truth. Modern conflicts often end the same way. People don't always agree, they just stop. The rule persists because harmony feels safer than closure. The medieval rule of endurance through discomfort also shows up in how people tolerate systems that don't serve them. Jobs, routines, expectations, people stay longer than they should, telling themselves it's normal, that everyone feels this way. Medieval peasants endured because survival depended on it. Modern people endure because leaving feels like breaking an unspoken rule. And then there is the rule of gratitude. Medieval people were taught to be grateful for what they had because wanting more could be sinful or dangerous. Gratitude kept dissatisfaction quiet. Today, gratitude is often encouraged in ways that discourage change. Be thankful. Don't complain. Others have it worse. The language is gentle, but the function is familiar. Even personal ambition carries medieval tension. Wanting more once meant threatening hierarchy. Ambition had to be hidden or justified. Modern ambition is praised, but only if it doesn't disrupt comfort. People are encouraged to dream quietly, politely, within limits. The medieval fear of imbalance still frames how success is received. The medieval rule of "done to be difficult" may be one of the most powerful survivors. Difficult people disrupted order, they asked questions, they resisted. They made life unpredictable. Today, being labeled difficult still carries weight. Many people silence themselves just to avoid that label. Medieval society would recognize this immediately. And yet something has changed. For the first time, large numbers of people can see these rules clearly. History is accessible. Patterns are visible. The past can be examined instead of simply inherited. Awareness cracks the shell that kept these rules intact for centuries. You don't have to abandon kindness to question silence. You don't have to reject order to refuse unnecessary guilt. You don't have to destroy tradition to choose consciously. The medieval world taught humanity how to survive together. The modern world offers humanity the chance to choose how to live together. That difference matters. Because rules are only powerful when they are invisible. Once seen, they must justify themselves. Some will. Some won't. And that is not disrespecting the past. That is completing its work. The Middle Ages were a long lesson in survival. We are living in the chapter where survival is no longer the only goal. So as this story finally settles, it leaves you not with an instruction, but with a lens. A way of seeing everyday life differently. A way of noticing when an old rule steps forward and asks to be obeyed. You can still listen. You can still follow. But now you can also ask, who made this rule? What problem did it solve? And does that problem still exist? Because the most medieval thing of all was never the rule itself. It was obeying without asking why. And in that moment of questioning, something remarkable happens. The whispers of medieval rules no longer feel like commands. They feel like history speaking through you, offering insight instead of insistence. You begin to see patterns everywhere. The hesitation before speaking, the automatic apology, the careful observation of hierarchy, the invisible fences around behavior. Each is a thread linking you to a world that no longer exists, but still shapes yours. Even the rules we think of as trivial reveal their past. Saying please and thank you is more than politeness, it's a medieval habit of signaling cooperation and social stability. Standing when someone enters the room is more than respect. It is a ritual learned from centuries of survival under authority. The rules are everywhere, not as law, but as instinct. And yet, they are malleable. Awareness is the key that transforms obedience into choice. Once you notice the medieval blueprint behind your actions, you can bend it, reinterpret it, or let it go entirely. Silence is no longer mandatory. It can be chosen. Shame is no longer binding. It can be questioned. Routine is no longer compulsory. It can be reshaped. Even fear, the original engine of many medieval rules, can be reframed. Fear of chaos, of embarrassment, of social rejection, these guided countless behaviors for centuries. Now, fear can be informative rather than controlling. It can signal an inherited instinct rather than dictate action. You can choose how to respond. The brilliance of these surviving rules is that they carry memory without explanation. They teach without textbooks, enforce without punishment, and shape without force. Medieval society may have disappeared physically, but emotionally and socially it continues. Every habit, every instinct, every unspoken norm carries its echo. And the extraordinary part is this: the rules are no longer absolute. They are invitations rather than commands. They ask you to consider, to reflect, to act consciously. You are no longer a medieval subject bound by bell, hearth, and hierarchy. You are a modern human walking through centuries of inherited wisdom and restraint, free to honor what helps, discard what hinders, and reinterpret what remains. So when you follow a rule for no reason at all, pause. Notice it, trace its origin. Decide if it belongs to you or to history. This act of awareness is itself a break from the medieval mindset, a small rebellion that does not create chaos, only choice. The Middle Ages have whispered their lessons across time. The echoes are in your manners, your routines, your fears, your courtesy, your patience, your endurance. And now, at last, you can listen to them deliberately, not as commands, but as guidance, as insight, as history breathing quietly through modern life. The bells may never ring again. The torches may never burn. The watchmen may have disappeared. But the lessons, surprising, invisible, unbroken, live on in every pause, every instinct, every choice. And that is the legacy of medieval rules. Not the rules themselves, but the power to recognize them and choose. And in that recognition lies freedom, the kind medieval people could hardly imagine. Their rules were chains of survival, built to protect life in a world where one misstep could be fatal. Today the stakes are different, and yet the chains persist because they became invisible. Awareness is what allows us to see them for what they are, inherited patterns rather than unavoidable mandates. Even the smallest acts carry medieval echoes. Holding a door for someone, waiting your turn, lowering your voice in public. Each one was once part of a system designed to maintain order and prevent chaos. Today they feel natural. They feel polite. But they are centuries-old habits, invisible, unquestioned, yet enduring. And yet, awareness allows transformation. You can follow these rules because they bring benefit or ignore them because they no longer serve. You can retain the wisdom, shed the useless weight, and adapt what remains to modern life. The medieval world left behind both instruction and habit. Your task is to separate the two. Consider how much of daily life is shaped by these invisible forces: the deference to authority, the careful observation of social cues, the desire for routine, the instinct to avoid shame. Each behavior was honed for survival, then passed down, not through law books, but through generations of human experience. Modern life is safer, freer, yet these instincts persist as echoes, quietly guiding behavior. And here's the profound truth. Once you begin to see the medieval rules around you, you also begin to see your own power. The power to decide which rules matter, which ones protect cooperation, kindness, or trust, and which ones limit potential, creativity, or freedom. Recognizing a rule is the first step to reclaiming agency over it. Even more, recognizing these echoes fosters empathy. The discomfort you feel in awkward social moments, the guilt for minor mistakes, the instinct to follow ritual, these are all shared human experiences, refined over centuries. They remind us that our habits and judgments are not solely personal failings. They are inherited responses, deeply rooted in survival strategies. Understanding that allows patience with yourself and others. And so, the Middle Ages are no longer distant. They are here, in the way we navigate the world, in the silent agreements we follow, in the instincts we trust without question. They are in the rules we inherit, the habits we maintain, the choices we make often, without realizing why. The final lesson is clear: we are not bound by the past. The rules can guide, but they do not command. They can inform, but they do not dictate. We inherit the wisdom of survival, the instincts of caution, the structures of society, but we also inherit the freedom to reinterpret, adapt, and choose. The bells have fallen silent. The torches have cooled. The watchmen have gone home. Yet the rules remain quiet, patient, persistent. And now, finally, you can walk among them consciously, choosing which whispers to heed, which patterns to honor, and which legacies to leave behind. The medieval world is alive inside modern life, not as a chain, but as a guide. And it is up to you to decide how it will live. And so, after centuries, the story of medieval rules reaches its quiet conclusion, not in destruction or rebellion, but in awareness. The rules that once protected, constrained, and guided people through fear, faith, and necessity now rest in our consciousness, waiting for recognition. They no longer have the power to command, only the power to inform. We follow them still, sometimes instinctively, sometimes reluctantly, but now we can see their origins. We can trace the thread from a torchlit hall, a crowded village, a bell that rang for order, to our modern lives filled with habits, manners, and invisible expectations. What once kept communities alive now shapes our instincts, emotions, and choices in ways we rarely question. And that is the ultimate legacy of the medieval world. It taught humanity how to live together, survive together, and navigate complexity without chaos. The structures, habits, and rules it left behind are not relics. They are living history, quietly guiding modern life. The difference is that now we can choose. We can follow, adapt, or discard. We can honor what serves us and release what no longer does. In recognizing these patterns, we reclaim agency. The guilt, the fear, the ritual, the obedience, they no longer bind us automatically. They can guide us, enlighten us, and remind us of human ingenuity and resilience. But they do not dictate. That power is ours. So the next time you pause before breaking an invisible rule, hesitate in a line, apologize for nothing, or stand quietly where action feels more natural, remember, you are not simply obeying. You are participating in a centuries-long story, tracing the echo of survival, order, and habit. And you are free to choose your role in it. The Middle Ages did not vanish. They walked forward in habits, instincts, and social rhythms. They shaped manners, guilt, courage, and discretion. But today, their whispers are no longer commands, they are invitations. Invitations to awareness, to reflection, and to choice. And that is where the story ends, not with the fall of castles or the silence of bells, but with the realization that history lives inside us, guiding, informing, and waiting. The medieval world still breathes, not as a ruler, but as a teacher. And we are finally free to listen, learn, and decide. The rules remain patient and quiet. But the choice is ours. The Middle Ages at last have met the modern mind, and in that meeting, history becomes conscious. And with consciousness comes freedom.